Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Nest on Clubhouse. My name is Jim Chu, and I'm in San Francisco, California, and I'm the CEO of Untapped Global. And our goal is to connect international investors with entrepreneurs from around the world in frontier markets, including those in Africa and Asia. We host weekly discussions like the one here on Clubhouse today about entrepreneurship and investing. And once every month, we host pitch sessions with startups and investors from around the world. You can find out more and follow us at Untapped Global on Twitter, that's all one word, and LinkedIn. And you can join our WhatsApp community by going to untapped-global.com and clicking on Engage. Today's topic is Women Do It Better, Investing in Entrepreneurship in Africa. Do women do it better as investors and entrepreneurs? Why do they do it better? That's the question for today, and we have a very interesting panel of both investors and entrepreneurs to provide some insight and opinions. And in the second half of the hour, we open it up to the audience to get comments and questions and opinions from the broader audience. Well, with that, I'd like to welcome, first of all, Louise, who is joining us from Cape Town, South Africa. Oh, I'm sorry, Louise, is Cape Town correct? I know you're in South Africa, but I wasn't 100% sure you're in Cape Town.
Totally Cape Town. You're correct, Jim.
Perfect. So could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and perhaps just a quick insight on why you think women do it better with investing in entrepreneurship?
Jim, thank you so much. So I have been around for a number of decades, and Janine, if she could, she's next to me on the panel, but she would give me a sharp jab in the ribs and say to me, don't talk about that. But I have been around for a number of decades.
But Louise, you're only 29. How is that possible?
Exactly. So, but I think it's relevant in this context because investing in Africa, if you're looking at it from the geographical context, is one thing, but investing is another thing, just investing. And as somebody who comes from quite an Anglo-Saxon background, the man in the family managed the money in many instances, and particularly in a working family, not a family where there was large family inheritances or whatever, because I was thinking immediately of the Vanderbilt family. But the woman traditionally wasn't an investor. And I think that younger women do it so much better. I think that people over the age of, say, 50, 60, 70, I can't speak for all of them, but I think they don't do it so well. And I think that the younger women, when I look at my daughter's age group, the 30s or the 20s, they are ready to roll. They're informed, they've got information at their fingertips, and they are standing up for themselves and seeing that if they don't create an environment that is going to support their lifestyle, their future, their children's lifestyle, nothing's going to happen. And I think they're taking it into their own hands nowadays. So, yes,
so I know you do a lot of pitch training, Louise. Have you come across and what's the ratio of the entrepreneurs that you help with pitch training? Do you see equal ratios? Do you see more men? Do you see more women? What does it look like for you, especially among the younger generation?
So few women who stand up for themselves, but I have to give it to the younger women again. You know, earlier on, Lundy will know, I worked on a MEST program with her, and all I did there was give a masterclass. And there was one woman in that masterclass who went from completely useless with her pitching. She was so embarrassing. She was a South African. And I thought, oh no, please do not represent this country. It is so poor. And she absorbed every single word I said and went to totally expert on her pitch. So if you're talking about the people pitching, I find that the women are ready to learn and the younger women are ready to learn. And without learning, without listening, without growing, you're not going to do it better. Thanks, Jim.
Well, thank you for joining us, Louise. Thanks for those thoughts. Over to you, Janine Basel. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and some quick thoughts about why you think women are better investors or entrepreneurs, or do you think women are better entrepreneurs and investors? Janine. Oh, we don't quite hear you. So we're going to skip Janine really quickly and go over to Hope. Hope, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Jim.
So
thank
I
you
think
for the
Janine's coming
invite,
back.
And my background is...
Hey, Janine, I think we're having some, you might be having some connection issues. We're having trouble hearing you. So I'm going to skip over to Hope for the time being, and then we're going to come back to you a little bit later. Hopefully the connection's a little better. So sorry about that, Hope. Go ahead, please. A little bit about your background, and it happens indeed.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
So I think I'll just give a brief intro to myself. So I currently work as the venture sourcing lead for Founders Factory Africa, based in South Africa, but we make investments across the continent. And I also run an organization called We Fund Women, which essentially aggregates the pipeline of gender smart startups across the continent and then tries to match them to investors. And I think, there's three reasons why women, do it better from an entrepreneurial perspective. Firstly, we do have the highest entrepreneurial activity in the world, particularly in Africa. So I think there is that growing appetite for women to kind of take that risk and essentially jump into entrepreneurship and, sort of introduce new innovations and ideas into the market. And I think we see that year on year. I'm increasingly engaging with a number of women startups, women-led startups, which is quite exciting. And I think secondly, just based on my work, so I spend a lot of my time advising them in terms of, how to refine their pitch, how to refine their business models, and essentially how to be more attractive to investors. And they definitely have much more unique insights into the problems that they're trying to solve for. I think they're highly perceptive individuals just by virtue of culturally how they're raised, as well as they better at managing resources and people. By virtue of being more relationship driven, I think they're able to manage the complexities that an entrepreneur needs to manage at scale in order to be able to grow sustainable businesses. And I think, with some of the incredible women-led startups that have been able to see reach Series B levels, I think they're in highly complex industries that could grow intelligence, and you need to manage a lot of resources, a lot of stakeholders in order to grow to business to that scale. And I think they just do it quite well. And lastly, there's just a lot of research on how they do have a higher ROI per dollar spent. And I think, it's just about, I guess, documenting this research within an African context where I come from. That is one of the things that I'm quite passionate about. And then I think from an investment perspective, right, the largest consumer market is women globally. So for you to be able to kind of relate to the consumer market, relate to underrepresented products and businesses, you do need women on the investment team. And traditionally, we haven't been represented. So I think just that diversity of thought that women are able to bring to the table definitely, I think, makes them better investors to tap into those underrepresented and often overlooked communities as it currently stands.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that background. I do want to come back a little bit later in the hour to talk about some stats, both anecdotal statistics from your experience, but also statistics from various studies, Harvard Business Review and others around this topic. But moving on to Raj Kulasingham, thank you for joining us.
Oops, here we go. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Glad you could join us. I know you're an active investor and you've invested in a number of women-led startups. So I'd love to hear from you. First of all, a little bit about your background and also why do you think, or do you think, and why do you think women are better investors and entrepreneurs?
Sure. My name is Raj Kulasingham. I'm originally from Malaysia, lived in the UK for the last 30 years. I'm international lawyer based, working for a law firm called Dentons, but I'm an active angel investor in the UK, Africa, and now sort of branching out to a few other interesting places like Silicon Valley in Indonesia, but those are sort of aberrations. So the whole issue of investing in female-led entrepreneurs, I'm a big supporter of that, and I think I'm as guilty as a lot of people, where you're just doing what everyone else is doing and not really obviously looking a bit harder. So I suspect that if you look at my portfolio, I've only got maybe 2 out of 35 companies, only 2 are female-led. But both the female-led ones, I'm super keen on. One of them, I was her first investor. Jim very graciously joined me on the journey. It's a UK company, and I would like to do more. And so the second part of your question is, what do you do to promote more interest in investing? I think it's just about raising people's awareness. There are lots of statistics about women being better. I know that women are better than men at a lot of things. My wife's a whole lot better than me than a lot of things, right? And I know that. And I'm a big fan of, that's reality. So, women are better at organization. I mean, look, these are all sort of general statements, right? But my point is that if I look back at myself, I'm slightly embarrassed to say that, out of my 35 companies, I've only got 2 female-led companies, and I'd like to change that. And I'm actively looking to do more to support more female entrepreneurs. And I think there's a massive gap in the market for people looking to invest in female-led companies, because I think women are, in many cases, as good, if not better, entrepreneurs than men are. But obviously,
so we definitely want to come back to that topic later in the hour on, how do we invest in more? How do we source and more entrepreneurs and also more investors? As you know, we run a program where we have pitch sessions between angel investors and entrepreneurs, and it's oftentimes a struggle to find female investors and female entrepreneurs. So that's something that I would certainly like to know better. How do we identify good investors and entrepreneurs that are female? We have one more person on the stage, Sarah Dusek, also based in Cape Town. Welcome, Sarah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your fund, specifically targeting female entrepreneurs and addressing the question, why?
Yes, thanks, Jim. Yes, I'm Sarah Dusek, the managing partner and founder of Enigma Ventures. Enigma Ventures is a US-based fund investing in female entrepreneurs across Southern Africa. So we are looking for exceptional female entrepreneurs in the 16 countries that make up the region of SADC in Southern Africa. And we've been investing now for the last 18 months. We've got 10 portfolio companies thus far, all of whom have a female, at least one, often more female founders. And I guess I don't love the question, Jim. I'm going to say that as my premise. I don't love the question of women, or it's not really a question, but it's a statement, I guess. Women do it better. And I think what maybe harms the feminist movement to a degree is this idea that, doing it better, or it's this idea that there's some kind of scarcity, that if you promote women, that men will have less, or there's less opportunity for men.
It's a zero-sum game.
Women, yeah, exactly. It's this idea, but that's not the case, right? There's no scarcity. We don't live in a finite scenario.
You're absolutely right.
And it's not a case that if women are better, men are worse. Definitely, we both genders have huge strengths, huge minuses, right? And for women, the reason we're having this conversation is that women have not had the same opportunities and the same access to capital, or the same access to role models or education or opportunities that men have historically had. And we definitely have all, are as capable, and in some ways are more capable in various areas than men. And so the struggle around gender inequality is really about lack of equal access historically, that we now have to correct, and we now have to actively engage with to do something different about. It's called counter steering. And so the idea behind our fund is I genuinely believe that betting on women is a good bet, and have based the thesis of our fund on the idea that if we make investments in women, we will make an incredible return on our investments, and we will change the way the world looks, because women see problems differently. We have different solutions to different problems, and we will be a more holistic, better integrated world, solving problems in different ways and seeing things different ways and bringing different solutions to the table because of our integrated approach together. And so that's how I think about our gender.
You sold me, Sarah. We need to talk about your fund, especially if it's US based. So let's talk offline about that.
We are.
Excellent. Well, welcome all the panelists on the stage, and I do want to come back to that discussion. I think Sarah, you've very well clarified. This is not a zero-sum game. This is about providing more opportunities to those who may not have the opportunities, but also finding opportunities for investors to fill blind spots that simply are there. So, but with that, before we jump into the topic more deeply, I do want to remind everybody that this call is being recorded, and we are live streaming this on YouTube. If you have friends who are interested in joining but are not on Clubhouse, they can go to LinkedIn and search on Untapped Global, and they can participate in the discussion, at least from a chat perspective, and we will make best efforts to include the comments and questions from the chat box into this discussion. And just also a reminder, we host these sessions every week. Although next week we are having a pitch session on the Nest. And if you'd like to find out more about any of these sessions, please go to untapped-global.com and click engage. And you can sign up for notifications from Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on. All right, well, going back to the question, before we jump that, I want to go back to Janine. I don't know if Janine, your network connection has improved. If so, would you like to give us a little bit of background about yourself and some thoughts on the question?
Hey, Jim, is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it is better.
Super looper. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the invite. My background is in the entrepreneurial community, is working with entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, through various means, including in finding investment for them and acceleration. And just to a quick side note here, very few women coming forward for investments. So I'm very, very excited about this topic. And in terms of why I think either startups, headed by female entrepreneurs or investments led by female investors is great. My feeling is that women balance the internal and the external well. And, I feel like they are collaborators, they pick up on signs. And I know these are things that everyone talks about. But, I feel that there's a lot to that. We can't ignore it. They're good at organizing. We all know that, risk intolerant, and therefore they're going to look really closely at the numbers. And the risk intolerance, I think, goes back to historical, situations where they've really got to look out for their families. And, perhaps something to be aware of is maybe they're aware that we as women, we as women are aware of the stigmas attached. And, in terms of the touchy-feely aspect, and perhaps there's an overcompensation to look at, more solid aspects of an investment.
Interesting. Well, the Harvard Business Review did a study and found that in general, women were better rated than men as leaders, not just for the more stereotypical or obvious reasons, nurturing skills, developing others, and developing relationships and so on. But female leaders were better rated on all levels of business success, including problem solving, innovation, and initiative. So, certainly and every person is different, and every person has strengths and weaknesses. Men and women have different strengths and weaknesses on average. But there seems to be quite a bit of research that overall, as business leaders, especially around the emotional intelligence aspects, there's quite a bit of a advantage from women entrepreneurs. Going back to Sarah, Hope, Raj, and Louise, what do you think about that? Do you see that in the entrepreneurs that you've come across, both female and male?
I think that's a really interesting observation, Jim. And I when we look globally at our world leaders over this last year and who's handled the pandemic well and who hasn't handled the pandemic well, I think there have been notable female leaders who've come out as having performed exceptionally well through this incredibly challenging time. So I think there's a lot even just recent, anecdotal evidence to sort of back up some of the things that you were just noting. And I think,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say,
ahead,
I think that's about empathy. I do think that's about EQ, and I think that's becoming ever more important and increasingly significant in our current age. And women are naturally more inclined that way. So I think that's a large part of some of those leadership traits that we're seeing come to the forefront, particularly on a global stage.
I completely agree with you. And actually, I'm thinking back to some of the entrepreneurs that I've dealt with, and a couple of examples where I think if I was dealing with a female founder, I think it would have been a very different conversation, right? So this is maybe not theoretical, but I'll just give you my example. So it's often very, if you have a disagreement with a entrepreneur or founder who's a male founder, it becomes confrontational. He says, people get entrenched in their position very quickly. And then it very, very quickly, rapidly escalates into you're almost like in an adversarial position, right? Whether, as a lawyer advising clients, so, even as a lawyer sort of advising my clients, very quickly on the other side, if the other lawyer is starting to being aggressive, it just quickly degenerates in everyone being aggressive, right? Whereas I think with counterparties who are female, you very rarely get into that kind of position because the atmosphere is usually a bit calmer and a bit less testosterone fueled. So I think that in itself is a good thing. And I've kind of had to try and teach myself to be, much more calmer and not react so quickly to things. And I think just anecdotally from my experience, I feel that when you're negotiating with a woman, it's a very different experience to negotiating with a man. That's kind of, but I think we can learn, right? I think I'm trying to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's just use the word ego. I mean, how much of this is about ego and hubris, right?
100%.
So many of these what's the right word? Not stereotypical, but well-known entrepreneurs, whether it's Steve Jobs or the founder of Uber, Travis Kalanick, or Elon Musk. How much of that is about ego and hubris?
Yeah, completely.
Yes, we're going to go to Mars. And how much of it is that? So there's an interesting separate Harvard Business Review study that showed there's nothing to do with women or men, but they just simply looked at EQ, and they found that both private and public companies, the CEOs that were rated higher in EQ did much better, both on the public markets and as private companies, than those with leaders that had lower EQs, emotional intelligence, right?
So maybe Jim, go on, sorry, Jim.
Go ahead, please.
So I think maybe the answer is, and I think I'm also getting drawn into this sort of division of male and female. So maybe the answer is not that. The answer is actually about EQ. But then I think the answer is that most women have higher EQ than men, right? So It's not a gender thing, it's an EQ thing, right?
Hope, Janine, Louise, thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, Janine, go ahead. It's always the two of us. I think you can have it this time.
No, sorry, Hope. So, I don't have much to add to that, except that, that is really, okay, I said it way ineloquently, but that's exactly what I was meaning about the balance of the internal and the external. Women pick up on signs, external signs, they're collaborators, they're good at, so I don't really have much to say about that, except that is what I believe is. I think ego, you brought it up, Jim. I think ego does play an important part, but on the flip side of that, and I know you probably don't want to go there yet, Jim, but on the flip side of that is that means women don't show up as not aggressively, as competitively as they ought to.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like Louise was talking earlier about some younger women, I'm absolutely in awe of younger women who are really embracing the competitiveness. I don't want to use the word aggressiveness or testosterone, but just more willing to come into the race. I think that's really what I mean. So that's what, coming back to that balance, right? The internal, the external.
Gotcha. Right. Well, thanks for that, Janine. Hope, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what I want to add is just a little bit more context in terms of, how we also define leadership has changed over the years. And I guess the underlying traits that used to be emphasized in terms of what a leader looks like and what encompasses leadership, right? Your charismatic leaders. And essentially that's why we'd associate with Steve Jobs and sort of some of the Silicon Valley CEOs, right, as the typical leaders. And just really what's interesting about, the research that Harvard has done is try to, codify what leadership looks like, and then have a more standardized and objective way to kind of measure leadership traits, and then I guess map that to results, right? And I think that's what I find interesting, that yes, EQ is such a strong indicator for leadership, particularly in an entrepreneurial context where you are managing people, right? So outside of resources, you're managing people. In order to scale, it's the people that are going to drive that scale for you. And how can we, I guess, redefine what leadership and success looks like? And I think not only will that, I guess, empower women to kind of show up, because, to Janine's point, part of why they don't show up is if there's been a particular narrative that has been painted about what leadership looks like, what a typical startup CEO looks like, then there is that imposter syndrome that builds up on women founders, right, to exclude themselves from opportunities. But the moment you can kind of rewrite the narrative around leadership, more people show up, but I think also investors are able to kind of filter through what good looks like a lot more efficiently than the current data points data points around team and what the expectations from a personality perspective that they currently look to because of that backdated definition of leadership.
Gotcha. Interesting. Better metrics, better definitions. Again, VCs, investors in general, are notorious for pattern matching. We pattern matching the wrong things. Do we really need more Travis Kalanick's in the world? Go ahead, Louise, please.
Yeah, I've been busy investigating, and I'm at the very early stage, something called an episodic grasp of reality. And what it says is that there are stimuli within our surroundings that we need to organize. And if we can't organize them effectively at home, in business, whatever it might be, then chaos will ensue. And I think that women definitely have, and I actually say this to entrepreneurs that I'm training to pitch, I say you've got to have your antennae out and pick up all the triggers that are happening around you. And without that, you don't have an ability to organize what you need to bring to others, really, whether it's your staff or whether it's your target market, your investors. So your antennae have to be out the whole time, picking up these different stimuli and organizing them so that they make sense. And if you can't organize, the ripple effects that you're looking for will not happen. And I wonder, I know nothing about this, but I just wonder if that ability to reflect and project into the future with ripple effects, that the desired outcome happens in this environment sufficiently, or is it a case of this, I don't want to call it testosterone, but just life is difficult when you're a founder. Life is difficult when you're a general partner raising funds for, and you just want to get it to happen immediately without thinking of the longer term. Just a question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, ego, hubris, and drive all go together to a certain degree, right? But I do want to shift the topic a little bit to some more practical examples. I know you guys are all very experienced investors, but I would like to shift to two questions. Number one, what are some examples of great companies, whether they're startups or even slightly larger companies that are female-led? And does the fact that some of these traits that we're talking about have an effect on their success or contributed to the success? That's number one. And then the second question is, on the investor side, do some of these traits that we're talking about lead to better investors? So I'm going to pose those two questions to this panel, and I also like to open it up to others in the room who would like to join us on stage for the second half of the hour. So please raise your hand and we'll bring you on stage. And when you do, you'll give yourself a very quick intro and then your thoughts on some of these questions. But anybody on stage would like to answer either of those two questions now? Sarah.
Jim, when I think about, I obviously was a female founder myself, founded a large company in the US, grew it, scaled it, sold it. And I have multiple female entrepreneur friends who've done the same. And the one that springs to my mind right off the top of the gate is Sarah Blakely of Spanx, underwear company. And, people told Sarah that selling, stretchy underwear was, not a thing. And she's built a multi-billion-dollar company over the last decade, and done extraordinary things. So, I think, and many of my, who I now call friends and colleagues who've also been entrepreneurs and grown and sold companies, is this idea of women are often told that's not a thing, that's not it's not investable in, and largely because the people in the room making those decisions are men, and they don't see the opportunity, they don't think, and they don't look like the person who's pitching the idea, and so it's much harder to get on board with the idea. And so women have had to be very creative, very persistent, persevere, bootstrap, get a long way without having a lot of capital, which has created some incredibly profitable, well-run businesses, because they've had to go the distance and fight mountains and battles, and
here's a relevant comment from LinkedIn, Sarah, relevant to your comment. The comment is, I think there's research that suggests that women who are aggressive in terms of self-promotion, negotiation, etc., may not benefit from that orientation. They're actually penalized and labeled for taking those types of stances. So some of it may be just exhibiting less of X behavior, but some of it also reinforces gender stereotypes. That's Tayo Akinemi. Thanks, Tayo. And Tayo, we need to reconnect. I met Tayo in Nigeria 2 decades ago, and we still haven't connected. So glad you can join us on this conversation. Great. Any other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I'd like to add a thought maybe from the investor side and highlight a woman who's kind of done things differently, being Maya of Aggressive Capital here in Africa. And, I think it just speaks to, again, sort of what Sarah has mentioned, where you are excluded from opportunities and then you kind of chart your own way. And I guess speaking to the unique strengths that women would have and the way she built up the fund, right? So leveraging a lot of relationships in order to launch the first stage of the fund, being able to have unique insights into the type of companies that she's invested in, one of them being able to kind of have a significant raise last year. I think just showcases sort of how there's this unique gap that women and women's experiences and perspectives can still play a role in terms of identifying good investments into underserved markets and underserved founders currently, even within an African context. So I think, just from an investor perspective, and I guess those natural attributes that we say women lean more towards from a personality or leadership perspective, it's how, you can see it in terms of some fund managers and some, I guess, LPs and the type of investments that they are making, and then how those investments translate into something meaningful. But just to also add on what Sarah mentioned in terms of, the femtech industry, which is also picking up quite a lot of traction, like, some comparables in Africa being like a kasha. I think it's something that women entrepreneurs are best positioned to kind of ideate ideas around that, and their personal experiences kind of lend towards them being able to build successful businesses in that space. And I think, obviously just the management of it, the deep insight, as you've mentioned, the perception, as well as just managing the complexity within those industries and being able to do that at scale, I think are some successful examples I've been able to personally be proof.
Thanks for that, Hope. We have a couple more people who just joined us. Chantal, welcome Chantal to the stage, and give a quick intro to yourself, and you can answer the overall question, maybe one of the two recent questions as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me to the stage, Jim. I really, really appreciate it. And to everyone else on stage, as the title says, women do it better. And so I really just have been someone who has, I want to say, studied the specialty coffee industry over the last 3 years, and found some startling things that for me really need to be addressed in some way, shape or form. And I think particularly with focus on the farmers who are at the very start of the supply chain, making all of our coffee possible and being treated as though they were nothing at all. And so my aim really is to kind of bring attention to the plight of the farmers, and make the consumer more aware of what happens within that supply chain, and how we can have more transparent relationships where we see where our money is going to, when we're paying for this coffee, and how the farmer benefits directly. So a lot of the initiatives that are currently in place do not benefit the farmer at all, and it's a bunch of marketing. And to be honest with you, coffee is a very male-dominated industry. In fact, white male-dominated industry. And I'm there as a woman of colour who really wants to just kind of be and is as inclusive as I can, to really just have people be find a connection with the Good Coffee Project that kind of goes beyond coffee, and just having human compassion. And
so your company, the Good Coffee Project, how do you guys help the farmer?
How do we help? So we essentially, the farmer is often paid very little, if anything at all. In fact, often in debt to produce this coffee. And in a lot of the key producing coffee growing countries, you'll think of Brazil, you'll think of Ethiopia, you'll think of Kenya and Vietnam, and the list goes on in terms of places around the world where these farmers are paid next to nothing. And so really, as the Good Coffee Project, the aim is to go in at the market value, or at a somewhat of a premium, to make sure that the farmer gets a good payment, and cutting out a lot of the middlemen, actually, I think is what needs to happen. And, maybe they can be effective in some other area, but they clearly do not have compassion for the people that they're working with. And I think I was saying it in another room as well, that whilst I have these kind of, for me, they are feminine wiles, because they're nurturing, they're caring, they are, creative. And in terms of what the more masculine element of the thought process when it comes to, being in an industry, is the idea of, not making room for the creativity, not having the patience, and certainly not enabling people to have their voice and be authentic, within how they operate. And so I really, as an initiative, I really do want to kind of focus on, what is it that the farmer needs? What is it that the people want? What is it that the community would benefit from if things were to change? And it's in studies everywhere that, especially when it comes to agriculture and, coffee as an industry, giving the woman the more money, because there's often a pay gap, the woman gets paid less for doing more, actually, and whereas the man would tend to kind of spend outside of the family home, the woman would mostly spend it on behalf of her family. So it's really just looking at, kind of how the generations are also interpreting, agriculture as a career choice. I've had discussions in rooms about this, and I just really feel that there needs to be a strong change in approach to how the supply chains in general are treated. And it happens everywhere, in fashion, we could go on. It happens in every industry. The little people at the bottom are treated like nothing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Chantal, for joining us, and thanks for telling us about your company. Michael has also joined us. Michael, tell us a little about yourself and your thoughts on this topic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm the CEO of Pick Me Up, a leading mobility startup based in Nigeria. So, my little perspective on this topic is most times I feel I've worked with women in my organization, both in oil and gas and in my IT businesses and all that. So I feel most times that women limit themselves, probably because, especially in this part of Africa, Nigeria, probably because they already have a husband to take care of them. So most times they don't really have that push, that strong drive. But that's not to say there are not exceptional women. There are exceptional women out there. And when you give them leadership positions, they do things exceptionally well. They can be very, very multitasking. But in terms of entrepreneurship, you see few of them, men dominating the space, not because the men do not want them to come up, but I feel they by themselves limit their capacities. So most times they just relegate themselves to little businesses. You see a woman just doing one small business, then she's just okay. That drive is not there because they already feel, after all, my husband is there to take care of me. Whereas the guy is having that strong will, passion to move on because he knows he has a family to feed and all that. So going forward, I think the women, they need to come up more, be more forceful in the way they do their things, set up great businesses with huge mindsets in mind, not just settling for little entrepreneurship business. So that's what I feel. That's my thoughts. I'm Michael. I'm just speaking.
Michael, so what I hear from you is about traditional gender roles and how some people may feel confined to traditional gender roles. I'd love to hear what others on the panel think about that. Louise?
Jim, I'm going to jump in here. Michael, I listened to you quite carefully, and I wish I could remember every word that you said. So thank you for that. I would like to see men, instead of saying women need to, I'd like them to say, hi, women, come into the room. So, it all works two ways. It's both the man and the woman need to make that effort. And there were many things that you said about the lack of drive, and you said the capability of women, but there's a lack of drive. And I've got experience in this. Wow. I've got a history of lack of drive, where the home environment, the social environment, and I see it all around me, has not enabled a woman to be left with energy for drive. I work with so many entrepreneurs across the African continent where the female entrepreneur says to me, gosh, I'm so sorry, I've arrived 5 minutes late for this meeting, or I'm going on to something else. Most of the responsibilities they're carrying are home-based responsibilities. And men are very, very gracious to welcome women who step up in many instances, but they are not always making space for the women and inviting them in the business space. And they are certainly not taking on 50% or more of the home-based responsibilities. And the reason I say and more, possibly, is because women need that extra support today. And maybe tomorrow it won't be so necessary.
So what I hear is, again, traditional gender roles and responsibilities having an impact, and that it's the onus on both men and women to create room so that all genders have opportunity, especially women. That's what I hear. Any other thoughts from folks on the panel? And again, I invite those in the audience to join us as well if you have an opinion or comment. Anyone on the panel on this topic? Janine?
Sure. Yeah. So lots of opinions, but I'll keep a lot of my commentary to myself. But you know, a very interesting thing. My sister's actually a gender specialist in LA, and interestingly, we had this discussion over the weekend, and she was bringing up that research showing over COVID, even in the first world countries, that the education, because the children have had to stay at home, has fallen on the on the female role, the mother. So I think that just supports what you were just saying, Louise. Yeah, and from my experience in terms of working with startups, as I said, as a kind of by comment was, I ended up starting a company on the side to my main company, Acro, GBH Women in Entrepreneurship. And I started it specifically because I noticed on average 1 out of every 50 startups coming to me for investment, maybe one was a woman, and that woman would be partnered with a male founder. And the woman would have been doing the kind of rolling up the sleeves and all the dirty work, for want of another word. So it was out of that awareness that I saw happening and my own lack of ability to step into a leadership role that really highlighted, everything that we're talking about, and that Louise has brought up, cultural elements and society elements. And I think it was Sarah or yourself, Jim, who brought up that, if women do come forward in a more assertive role, they're penalized just for that. And I think that's something to bear in mind, Michael.
And by the way, that wasn't mine. That was a great comment from Tayo Akanyemi. So can't take credit for that. But yes, indeed, I think there is that double standard there. Okay, and thank you for that comment, Janine.
So guys, I know you guys were focusing on Michael, but I actually was hoping that I could get some feedback on some of the things I said. Maybe I said too much. I'm not sure, but was there any way of kind of feeding back on what I shared with everyone?
Was there something specific or a question perhaps?
No, anything that you wanted to point out. It doesn't need to be specific. It could have been anything that crossed your mind when I was speaking, or something that you thought you might like to share with me that may enhance what I'm doing. Anything.
Louise, Janine, Sarah, Hope, Raj, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, Chantel, you definitely highlighted a lot of the points that we're talking about here. You made it very specific to the coffee industry, which is your experience. And you spoke about the pay gap. And I think that is so important. If we could, that just empowers people immediately. And I don't know how to solve that problem, but, within your own industry, do you have any way that you can see that can happen within the coffee industry?
I definitely did try to be more generic with my response, because obviously coffee is quite a niche. So I know sometimes it helps the room to kind of open it up a bit more so that it's a more helpful question that everyone can benefit from. So in relation to the pay gap, for example, a lot of my thing is going back to the people. I think I pointed it out when I was speaking, but literally being able to ask the people, what is it that they need? Because a lot of what happens is when people are building initiatives or responses, they don't actually know what the people themselves that they're supposed to be serving needs. It's just as a means to kind of gain profitability rather than, actually solving like a global issue. And I think in each industry, they will have their, kind of isms. But I think it definitely is something that will require a more people-centered approach, if that helps at all.
I think you're definitely agreeing with what we've talked about the empathy and the understanding and the having a long-term view on the impact of every move one makes within a business. And I think that, yeah, there are probably other people who are more qualified than I am to address that topic of touching on every aspect of the business so that everybody benefits.
Definitely. And I think also qualification can go by experience as well, where you can become qualified as an expert by your personal experience and things that you've been through.
Well, thanks to Louise and Chantal both for that. I'd like to ask the audience, in response to the two questions that we posed. One is on the investment side, on the investor side, what type of traits may women be bringing to the table that can make them better investors? Have we seen, what are some great examples of female investors that are doing it in a different way? Thoughts from both the panel and those in the audience?
Well, maybe let me start. So Jim, one of the persons that I often co-invest with is someone who's been on this before, Geeta, who some of you may know. And I love investing with her because she brings a different element of dealing with an investment opportunity that, and I don't know whether it's female or just her, but she certainly makes me think about the way I do things in a very different way. And I'll give you an example. So I think maybe partly because of my training as well as a lawyer. So I'm very sort of methodical, very precise about stuff. And she's much more, look, I think we can manage this because of the relationship. Don't get too hung up about words that's in the contract, be more sort of flexible, be, more by handshakes, be more about developing the relationship that of trust, et cetera, right? So I think she's taught me to try to be more like that. And I think that's, I don't know whether that's necessarily a female trait, but that's certainly something she's helped me with. And I still find myself reverting to my old school of, getting everything down on a piece of paper and writing it down, making sure that all the, the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So that I think has been a really good experience for me.
Thanks for that, Raj.
Jim.
Go ahead, Louise, please.
I'd love to ask Raj. And Raj was in an earlier room as well. So we've had a whole afternoon together, the two of us. And
wow, it's like old friends.
I want to ask you something. When you talk about trust, I think that's an enormous point, and I love that you brought it up. When you speak about trusting others as opposed to dotting I's and crossing T's, do you think it's trust or do you think it's letting go of control?
Good question. I need to think about that. I think, I think it's probably control, and I think, but I think in my case, it's because my training is such that you do try and cover everything. You pay a lawyer to identify risks and cover them. That's what you do, right? And I'm always thinking about risks, and I'm always thinking, how do I cover these? And the only way you can cover it to a lawyer, in the olden days when my old lawyers had, is to write it down on a piece of paper. Now I'm learning to become an investor. So now I'm saying, well, can I cover this risk in a different way? Can I cover this risk because of trust and relationship and empathy and having other people on the side who knows the investor, who knows the entrepreneur, who knows the team well enough that we can manage issues better. So I'm not sure whether I've answered that question, but I think it's not letting go of control. It's actually learning to manage a situation through a combination of historically what I've done, which is contracts and also relationships.
10 out of 10, Raj.
Well, thank you.
I also would 100% agree, Raj. I think you've just pointed out that something that's so powerful is that great deals and great relationships between investors and entrepreneurs are based on great relationships. They're not based on great contracts, because contracts are for very, very worst case scenarios in reality.
Correct.
And if a deal is in a worst case scenario, you're already screwed. basically.
Well, actually, I would slightly beg to differ. That. Sorry to cut across. I'll let you finish, but I slightly beg to differ. That. Please finish.
I would expect nothing less.
Comes from the lawyer.
Justify their position, of course. But nobody's going to do away with contracts anytime soon. Your job is safe, Raj. But I have never known a scenario in a relationship, either being the entrepreneur or being the investor, where the relationship wasn't the most important thing. And I do think, sort of back to our topic, that women are better at managing relationships, being aware of the nuances in relationships, of trying to get to the bottom of the real issues, of fighting for sort of win-win scenarios, because those are the ideal, right? It's how do we both win in this scenario? How do we both understand what the other person wants and try and navigate towards that, and find compromises that work for everyone? And these are some of the things that become critically important for great investor entrepreneur scenarios, I think, and how women and men can work together better, and why more women need to get in the room as investors. That was one of the major reasons I became an investor myself after being an entrepreneur and selling my company, was the fact that I never encountered another female investor ever in all my years of trying to fundraise for my own business, and the struggle of dealing with folks who really, just relied on their contracts and their terms and the way deals were supposed to be, done, because this is the way they've always been done, and this is what they should look like, and I've got the power, and therefore I should have the money. I have the money, and therefore I should have the power, and all the rights and all the get out clauses, and the entrepreneur, a bit like Chantal was talking about, a bit like the coffee growers left with nothing at the end, and often that was my experience of how male investors treated entrepreneurs, was this idea that you're the little guy, and I'm the one with all the value and the power because I've got the money. And my experience of being a female investor is that it doesn't need to be like that. It doesn't need to look like that. So
Sarah, I'm going to put you on the spot with the question, because you have been on both sides, both as an entrepreneur and as an investor. Female investors, where are they? And what makes female investors good investors?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to raise funds I'm not going to lie, as a female investor, and Hope alluded to this earlier, that, when she was giving credit to female investors that she's worked with, and knows that we've had to be very creative with how we raise funds. And so it's very challenging for women to enter this arena. It's like a new frontier for women to head into, and so it's a tough space, and we're only just beginning to break into it, and people are just beginning to recognize that women need to be investors, and maybe could be actually quite good investors as well. But that's going to rely on men, who are forward thinking enough to realize that if they've got the keys to the kingdom, that actually they might make better returns if they share some of the keys, because of alternative ways of thinking about deals, looking at deals, building relationships, looking at opportunities.
Sarah, I'm calling you right after this.
But I need to respond to Sarah's point about contract. Right? I still think you need a damn good contract, because at the end of the day, when all said and done, relationships, etc., it gets to the point where someone needs to read the contract and says, what does it say? And you can have the best relationship in the world, and if your contract doesn't cover it, guess what? You're going to get screwed, right? So I think
in contrast to that, though, Raj, and to your point, I've never done a deal without a really good contract. But when you're getting to the point where you're having to look at the contract and you're having to engage with the detail of the contract, you're already in a situation where the relationship's breaking down, and the scenario is not a good one. And so you're headed towards a lawsuit, or you're headed towards a problem And, you know, that's the path nobody wants to be on.
You're probably right. But what I found, I mean, my own experience is that you get to that point and then you can go one of two ways. You can come up with a sensible solution and move forwards. Now, the relationship will never be the same again, but you can move forwards. Or it gets really nasty and you exit, or you have a fight, or you go to court. So, you know, it's not a binary kind of, you know, result. So I still think, you know, I'll still stick with my position that you need a good contract.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you both for that. We are at the top of the hour. I thank everybody for being part of this discussion. And you know, I'd like to leave it on that note. You know, contracts or relationships, which is better, men or women? And that was a joke, by the way, perhaps a bad one. Together. I mean, and I think the answer is we need all of it, right? So I think you know, at the end of the day, a diverse leadership team means you get advantage of all the various skills. And certainly we can't overlook the fact that to run a good company, you need all of it. You need good contracts, you need good relationships, you need good everything. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for being part of this discussion today, and remind everybody that we have discussions every week about entrepreneurship and investing in frontier markets. And once every month, we host pitch sessions with startups and investors. Next week, March 18th at the same time, or actually 9 a.m. Pacific time because of the daylight savings change, and 7 p.m. East Africa time. Yes, and I know it's a little bit different in the UK, so I don't know exactly.
We get more daylight.
It's still 4 p.m. Yeah, you get more daylight.
It's 5.
We're going to have a pitch session with 2 companies focused on blockchain technology. So please, if you want to find out more, if you want to sign up, please go to untapped-global.com, engage, or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. With that, thank you everybody for joining, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks guys. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.